So, let's see. Let's go get in trouble.
Alright, people, we need to talk. We got a few things to cover here. I want to address this business in Georgia recently with the Senate seat contest and a little bit of the how and why. Say this based on my years of experience living in Georgia and traveling the back roads of Georgia. Near the end of my time in the Army, I worked Guard Reserve Liaison Office at Fort McPherson, Georgia. Part of my responsibility was to help set up and get running a couple of Georgia National Guard units, and another part of my duties was to go around and visit different Guard and Reserve sites, look at what they were doing, evaluate, give help where necessary, show them what their strengths were, what the things were that they needed to work on to improve, and all of that good stuff. And that was fine. I really enjoyed setting up those units. That was very satisfactory, very rewarding work. However, I did find that there were some problems. I will never forget this one Guard unit we walked into, and everything was going fine. At about 11 o'clock, a bell rang, and everything just stopped. And all of the people went and they gathered up in a big old room in this facility. Now, this facility had, about 14 active Guard and Reserve soldiers and like 30 technicians who were doing all sorts of machinery maintenance and repair and stuff. Well, these guys had decided that 11 o'clock that day was just the perfect time to have a prayer meeting. They all got together, dragged out their Bibles and sang hymns and read the Bible and had their little prayer meeting. And they weren't real happy when we explained to them that they were breaking several federal laws, several state laws, and several bits of code in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that they had to quit doing this right now. There was some kickback from them on that, but once we, got the Inspector General's office and the JAG office involved, and they were told that they could either quit that or they could quit the National Guard. So, needless to say, they did take appropriate action. Now, in working with these people, I got to see rural Georgia as it was back in the late 80s. And it wasn't anything fun to look at. Most of the people I know tend to think that small town, rural environment is just wonderful. It's great for the kids. Everybody's honest and super sweet and everything, and they think it's Mayberry RFD or something like that. And it isn't. It's nothing like that. For the most part, note there are exceptions. For the most part, these people are poorly educated, under-informed. They're also insular, xenophobic, and tend to think in simplistic ways. From what I gathered in visiting all these places was that most of them were either only high school graduates or GED people. And the education they got in the rural South left a lot to be desired. Many of them had only basic mathematics skills. I wonder sometimes if they had all taken the SAT, what the scores would have looked like. Many of them, I think, would probably not have qualified to get into the University of Georgia or Georgia Tech or Georgia Southern or Georgia State, any of those great schools. This means also, because of their relative isolation at the time, they were underinformed. They did not know. They were ignorant of vast bodies of information, vast knowledge of what was in the world and what was out in the world. They knew only what was right there for them in their community. Many of the service members I talked to had only been out of their hometown when the Army shipped them off for basic training or advanced individual training, or for basic officer course or the WOC course or whatever. And that was simply to go to another military post. So they had no experience beyond their immediate surroundings. They were insular in that they tended to cast a shady eye on strangers, people they didn't know. It took them a while to warm up to you, if they ever warmed up to you at all. You were either one of them or you were an out, a stranger, someone to be suspicious of. This also leads to xenophobia. This means that anyone beyond or outside of their state there's probably something wrong with them. And all of this, in part, is due to the basic worldview that gets drilled into you if you live rural, agricultural. Your life is dependent on things being the same and staying the same. If there's a little too much rain, if there's a little too little rain, if there's too much sun, if there's not enough sun, that affects the crops. If the crops aren't good, this threatens your livelihood. Threat to the livelihood is a threat to the self. It becomes an existential threat. This way of looking at things then gets transferred to things in general, so that anything that deviates from their norm is an existential threat. They don't want none of it. So people coming into Georgia from another state and going to talk to these people have a giant wall to climb. Let me give you an example. This is an extreme example, but I hope it will serve to illustrate my points here. While I was at Fort McPherson, somebody at the Guard Liaison Office in the Pentagon thought it would be a darn good job if we got 6 or 8 people from each Army unit, each company, and take them overseas to where they would be mobilized if the balloon went up. So, for example, this one unit, if this one company of soldiers got mobilized, they would go to this wonderful little place in South Germany to perform their mission. So we got ourselves a timetable, built up a schedule, built up the logistics and all of the stuff that had to go into this. And I went on the first round of the first group that went, and it was a disaster. There was incessant whining, bitching, moaning, and complaining that all of these signs were in German and nothing was in English. They turned on the TV and started strolling through the channels, and their favorite TV shows weren't on there, and all of the shows were in German. And this one guy says there ought to be a law that they have to do everything in English. Don't they know people speak English? Why don't they speak English over here? Then took them out to eat to a nice local restaurant. And of course the wait staff are speaking German and the menu's in German, and I'm trying to explain to them, well, this here is steak and this here is chicken and this here is fish and this dish is faced this way and this dish, and this guy again, why ain't it in English? Ought to be in English. Damn it, we're Americans. Don't they know we're supposed to? God dang it, they ought to be a law. They ought to have all this stuff in English. And he got up and he left the table. Lo and behold, he wandered the streets till he found a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he bought himself some Kentucky Fried Chicken, went back up to the hotel, locked himself in the room and refused to come out for the rest of the trip, and made one of the NCOs go to that Kentucky Fried and buy him Kentucky Fried Chicken every dang meal for a week.
It is not 59 degrees.
These guys, you know, they're like some guys I knew when I was stationed in Germany. The guys we called barracks rats.
Your
They
clock
got over to
may be
Germany.
right,
They got to their
but their temperature
base,
is
their post,
pale.
their barracks, their fort, whatever, and they never left the post. They went to their barracks, to their assignments, to the PX, to the commissary, to the chow hall, and then back to the barracks and stayed there. They never went outside into the German world. And the thing of it is, these guys from Georgia and the little barracks rats in Germany were proud of themselves. They thought that this was the best. This is why this insular, xenophobic, uneducated, uninformed populace will vote for someone like Herschel Walker. First, he was a big-name celebrity in that state as a running back for the University of Georgia. Everybody knew his name. Years after he had been there, he was still well known. He was a celebrity, and they will vote for celebrities. Second, he ran as a Republican, and in the rural, agricultural South, if there's an R by the name, that's who they're going to vote for, because it's simplistic, binary thinking. R is good, D is bad. That's how they think, and until somebody can tell them exactly how that is not the case and give it to them in detail, that's what they're going to do. This also goes back to Herschel Walker being an athlete. That is their team. They support their team, and in this case, R is their team, so they are going to support their team. Simplistic, binary thinking. Now, I'm going to qualify that. It's not just rural, agricultural, right-wing, reactionary people who think in those ways. From my most recent experiences trying to work with people who I guess you could call progressives. They aren't really progressives. They're so far on the left that they also think in simplistic, binary terms. Like this one young lady I talked to, she wants to get rid of every jail, every correctional facility, every prison, everything. None of that at all. To her, they are the same as the Nazi concentration camps of World War II. She could not be shaken. She could not be shook. Shucka-lucka-lucka. She could not be moved from that position at all. Needless to say, she had never, ever been inside one. Had no experience of people who were criminals or what they could do.
I think this
I
condenses
guess her
to a
world had a
single
nice rosy tint to it, but wowie gee gosh. So this is why someone like Herschel Walker could have been elected in the state of Georgia off the rural vote. And it was darn close. It was much closer than it ever should have been. But when you get all of this stuff together, the lack of education, the lack of information, insularity, xenophobia, simplistic binary thinking, what you get as a basic world view is fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. They hate anything that is not like them. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, from my conversations with all of those people over all of those years, they think that everybody should be just like them, and everywhere else in the world should be just like their little 2,000-person hometown in southern Georgia. That is what they want. They want you to be like them, and they want your town to be like their town. All the same, everywhere, because they are afraid of the unknown, the unfamiliar, and the strange. Now, that is not to say, I don't want you to get the impression that these service members were bad soldiers. They weren't. They were good at their jobs. The job that was right immediately in front of them, they were real good at it. They could do it all day long and do it outstanding job. Being active duty military out on a mission, though, was not something they could do. As I found out later, a lot of those units, when we got to Desert Storm and we tried to mobilize those units, most of them, well, less than 60% of their duty roster showed up. They had deadlines for when they were supposed to be at their port of embarkation to go away. Most of them hadn't even finished loading up their stuff to move to the port of embarkation by the day they were supposed to leave the United States. And most of those units, once they got to their POE, they were reviewed by regular Army people to see can they do their mission. And they performed so poorly that they got shipped to different training centers around the U.S. Fort Benning, Fort Sam Houston, Fort Huachuca, wherever, Fort Bliss. And they stayed at those centers trying to train up and trying to train up and trying to train up and trying to train up, and they never trained up. When the end of Desert Storm came to be and that chapter of the book was closed, those people were still at the training centers. They had not come up to standard, and they just got shipped back to Georgia. But I do want to say that it was not all doom and gloom working there, working in the Guard Liaison office. A lot of it was disheartening. Do live in hope that the Guard and Reserve people have improved since the late 80s. But there were some spectacular, stellar units back then. I'll never forget this one time we got a tasking straight from the Pentagon. We had to develop a whole situation, an entire operation. What we had to do is get several battalions of combat heavy engineers, all field equipment they needed, and we had to go down to South America. We had to go to Peru. See, there was this little town in Peru. It's if memory serves, it was in the north of Peru. If you look on a map of Peru, up near the north, right where the mountains start, there's a little river that comes down from the north heading south. Well, there were people there. They were nowhere near any kind of improved road. It was just, goat trails. But these people had been living by this river since time immemorial. They depended on this river for their livelihood. But then an earthquake came and shook the whole place up, and where they were split in half, and the village half went up and the riverside went down, and when it was all over, the river was several hundred feet down a steep cliff. These people had no water, no way to access that water. They had tried on their own. The Peruvian authorities and their civilian workers had tried to figure out ways to get water from that river up 200 feet of cliff to this village. And they had laid some stuff out really well. They had a collection pond at the top right near the village, so if we could get water up this cliff into the holding pond, everything would be golden. So we were tasked with getting engineers and equipment and pumps and all sort of stuff down here to Peru to get to this little town, put together a system so they could have water. We would be saving several thousand lives, which was deemed a darn good thing. Well, it was also good training for the troops, right? Fine. So we put everything together in a very short timeline. I mean, it was pressed to the wall every day. Even when we got on the airplanes, we were still finishing up the plans. So we get to Peru. We're at the docks, and nothing's there when it's supposed to be there. So we go ahead and we send the troops on up to their location, see what's going on, see what they can do, blah, blah, one thing and another. And they're making friends with the locals. When the ships come in, and we offload these ships and we put them on trailers, and we've got boxes and crates and crates and crates and boxes and crates, and we haul all of this stuff all the way up this dirt roads to this little village in Peru. And we're down here at the bottom of this cliff, standing next to this river, and we start unloading everything. We're opening boxes, uncrating crates, doing all of these good stuff, and none of the equipment we need is there. None of it. No shovels, no picks, nothing. What we do have is large bottle after large bottle after large bottle of pickles. We've got tons of pickles. Needless to say, we just like, oh God, what? How stupid can this be? And I look over, there's this old grizzled chief warrant for, been in the army since, the Wright brothers. And he looks at the pickles and he looks around and he says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Everybody, open those bottles of pickles. And what we're going to do is stack these pickles. Just start where the river is and stack the pickles and just keep on stacking them and keep on stacking them and keep on stacking them and keep on stacking them. So we get to work. I got no idea what's going on here, but hey, the chief says it. Even the colonel's going, all right, well, we'll just stack pickles. And pretty soon we've got this stack of pickles ramped up, going right up from the river all the way to the top of the cliff. And I'll be darned, we put that last pickle at the top of the cliff and the water just started running right up those pickles. Ran right up the pickles, over the edge of the cliff and into the holding pond. And I'm standing there and I look at the colonel, and the colonel looks at the chief warrant officer, and chief says, yeah, I knew it. Dill waters run steep.